Oh, good. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fittest. I never introduced myself, but my name is Deborah Terpstra, or Deb. Call me Deb or Deborah, either one. If you call me Debbie, you probably know me from like when I was a child. But I am your host, and I am so excited because I have Sarah back with me today, Sarah Ford Bishop, and we are myth busting once again. This has become a really popular, it's become very popular and helpful, and I love it. So thanks for taking the time, even though you're in the middle of a hurricane.
Yeah, no, it's a great rainy day for, just having some podcast time, some content time.
Perfect. So we're going to be talking about today we're going to be talking about goals and some of the myths behind some training aspects. And one of the things that I see a lot is when I have a client who does an intake form, very common for women, I see, I want to lose fat and build muscle as their goal, right? Which is a very generic goal. So we want to talk a little bit about goal specificity and some of the aspects of that. Sarah, I was looking up something, and normally it's like outcome goals versus behavior goals, but you can also break it down as process goals, performance goals, and outcome goals, which I think is just a little bit more to that. So I don't know if you want to get started and say something.
Yeah, I like that idea of like process versus outcome goals. What I encourage a lot of people to do is to first set the outcome goal. So
Yep.
like set that big goal, like that one goal that you're really trying to achieve. So like maybe it's you're trying to get on stage, right? You want to compete in your first bodybuilding show, competition, whatever division you are in. Or maybe it's you really want to lose 30 pounds, or you really want to gain 20 pounds, whatever it is. Set that big goal. And then I like setting process goals for people, like weekly goals to check off that are leading toward that bigger goal. And then we build on that. Like once, maybe we don't need to set the weekly goal anymore. Like let's say you have your water intake, you have that nailed, or it's no longer a problem for you to be consistent with meal prep. Then we kind of add a layer on that. Or maybe the goal will be, for the fat loss, like, hey, wanting to lose 2.5 pounds a month, as far as like a target rate of loss, something like that, as far as like breaking down those more shorter term goals that still feed into the longer term goal.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that, it's kind of funny because when you focus on the process or the behavior, that is when you achieve the outcome. So it's really just breaking down, your bigger goal into those behaviors that will achieve that goal. One of the things that I wanted to mention, just because we have, I have so many people on this podcast who share what they're doing. And I know people are listening and always looking for ideas of, you have people that you admire, you have physique goals that are based on what other people look like. And to remember that when you focus on those behavior goals, the outcome is going to be your personal outcome. It is not going to be, so even if you apply behaviors that somebody else is doing, whether it's training principles or nutrition aspects, it's still going to be your version of what that looks like. And it's good to have goals and have people that you admire and you can get tips from, but I don't know, just a friendly reminder that it's always going to be you are the medium. And so you can only create some version of yourself. But yeah, so the behavior goals are, yeah.
And the speed is going to be the speed, right? Like one of my friends made and I'm going to mess it up, like how she worded it, but she had an analogy of like, she had a goal and she's a coach, like, has strength goals and coaches other people for their physique and health goals. But she was using her personal goal of wanting to grow her nails out, like tired of having like short nubby nails and wanting to have like nice long nails and whatnot. And being really diligent with her short-term goal of not picking at her nails, not biting them, not chewing them, but then being frustrated that after 6 weeks, they weren't like the picture on Pinterest, that she aspired to have them be. And it was like, whoa, like slow down. Like your nails were literal nubs before. Like they can only grow so much in 6 weeks, even though you were doing all these right things, right? So I think that's also important, is like not getting discouraged about like that whole like, are we there yet? Or I'm not where I want to be yet. And kind of looking for like kind of the little wins along the way. And that's where like the importance of having like the process goals and those shorter term goals, I think, really, is so important, is to have those little wins along the way.
Yeah. And social media can, especially some of these transformations, can look a lot more deceiving. I think there's a couple of coaches that I follow, and some of them have pretty extreme transformations, but what you're looking at is, maybe somebody who hasn't been training for a while, they get into a very strict protocol and they start stripping off body fat. Muscle is kind of coming back that has, was previously there and lost. So they've already really built that up to begin with. And you're looking at pictures and you're like, oh my gosh, this person looks huge and ripped. And a lot of times they've lost actually a lot of body fat. And we know that the leaner somebody looks in a picture, the bigger they look. If you put a sweatshirt and sweatpants on that person, they're going to look, you're not going to be able to see all that muscle and that definition. So looking at pictures, it's important to know the details, like the weight loss aspect, all of the context matters for a lot of these transformations. And again, I just want to say, like, people can get really caught up in social media and seeing like, oh, I'm going to hire that coach because he transformed that person in 16 weeks and it was ridiculous. But you don't know what was involved. You don't know what their previous history of training was. You don't know what the diet extremes look like, even performance enhancing drugs involvement, type of that type of thing. So there's a lot of aspects. So don't get caught up in the quick fixes. This particular podcast episode, we really do want to focus on behaviors that are going to achieve outcomes, but that are also behaviors that you can work on sustaining and that you're able to adhere to for the long term, so that you can continue to progress and not have to just worry about, I'm here, I made it to my goal, now what? You want to have those behavior changes in place so that you are able to continue to progress or maintain or whatever your goal is, and not, let's say, go back to a previous lifestyle or whatever because it was so fast. Yeah. What else? I knew this was going to be choppy.
Well, I think going back to, we touched on a little of the last episode, I think muscle versus fat loss as far as a goal and like wanting to do both at the same time. And I find for a lot of people, focusing on one or the other is a better way to go about it. That doesn't mean, like, especially if you're a beginner, like in a fat loss phase, that you won't be building muscle, or, if you focus on muscle, that you might lose a little bit of body fat, or your body fat percentage might, go down relative to the amount of muscle mass that you have. And your physique will improve, even though you're in a building phase. Building phase doesn't mean you necessarily are just packing on weight and it doesn't look good, right? It should mean that you're packing on, mostly, muscle mass. But anyway, back to kind of like deciding on a goal. Like, I do think deciding on one or the other, because then you can just narrow in on that and not kind of be in limbo land where you're like, am I progressing? Am I not? Like, and it depends, right? Like if you are, like I have a lot of like my mom's like getting back into training, like postpartum, like after they've been cleared, like we kind of have a goal of recomp, because there's somebody that really could recomp because maybe they took the last 4 or 5 months off hard training, and now we're getting back into consistency with training, with eating enough protein, etc. And for them at this stage of their life, when they're, running on low sleep, like, taking care of 2 kids now, like figuring out this new schedule, it makes more sense to have like more of like a goal of being at maintenance and establishing habits and letting recomp happen. Whereas someone else that maybe, just kind of came to me, maybe they're say 25 24% body fat, kind of skinny fat, and they're like, I want to build fat, or I want to build muscle and lose fat, I might say, hey, let's start with a fat loss phase. Let's kind of get your body fat percentage down a little bit, focus in on this, let's lose 10 pounds. And then from there, we're going to go into a building phase. For them, it might make more sense to kind of periodize like that.
Yeah.
Someone that's never not dieted before and never trained hard, like you might start off with a building phase because you've never done that. So there is a lot of kind of considerations there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really, it's just important for people to understand that if you want to build muscle, it's just so much better to be intentionally heading in that direction, because though recomp is possible, it's like you said, it's a lot of limbo land. And, you know, when your body has an excess amount of calories, and I don't mean like it has to be, like you said, a great surplus or something like that, but, you definitely have the fuel to train hard and you have the materials to build. And it's just, you know, I think you're much better putting in, you know, a 6 month at least, you know, type of a program that focuses on building. And I think like even now, I mean, you're in Florida, so I don't know how things work seasonally, but I always kind of think about things seasonally. Like people kind of like to look better for the summertime. And now we're going into the fall and winter months. And some of these months too have more like, you know, you've got more parties and gatherings where you might be doing more macro matching and things could get a little bit, you know, more into a surplus. And I think it just might be an easier time for, you know, and then if people are more stressed because they've got things like that going on, it's just a little bit easier to manage a higher food load, I think, than to be trying dieting through the holidays or something like that, you know?
Agree. So yeah, so for most of you listening, pick one or the other, or be okay living at maintenance and just kind of sitting there for a little bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what determines a good workout? This is something that, you know, we've talked about this before and I see it a lot, but you know, people will see how many calories they burned on their calorie tracker. They always talk about sweating, which some people like to have a good sweat when they're training or they're working out. I personally don't like to sweat when I'm I mean, we live in Michigan, so it's not like the hot humidness of Florida, Sarah, where you are. I feel like if I'm training and I'm sweating, it's really hot because I don't usually sweat while I'm lifting weights. So anyways, but some people like that, right?
I'm a great sweater, but for that reason, I cannot use it as a marker of a good or bad workout, right? And sometimes, currently, at least in Florida, my sweating leads to a bad workout because I can't grip the bar, like with like my deadlift, for example. But yeah, like how much you're sweating, like how high your heart rate is, how many calories you're burning. These aren't necessarily good markers of an effective workout targeted to building muscle and increasing your strength.
Yeah.
Like, yes, your workout should be challenging,
Yeah.
but we're not looking for burning a certain number of calories on your Apple Watch. And if that's what you're looking down at every single set or at the end of your workout, or you're staying in the gym until you hit a certain amount of calories,
Yeah.
you're really going about it totally wrong.
Well, and the reason why these are bad measures is because they're not good at measuring, you know, they're not good at measuring anything. Like you said, sweating, it has variables, whether you sweat or not, or why you would be sweating. And, you know, calorie trackers vary from tracker to tracker. And, you know, and it just depends on what you're doing. Even rest, how rested you are can have an effect on how many calories you're burning in a workout. So it's an inconsistent measure to begin with. So and then calorie trackers vary from, you know, one to the next. And we know from a lot of the research that they're not accurate. I mean, some are up to 40% inaccurate. So especially like the treadmill one where you like hold and then it tells you like,
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
like
I remember like, God, when I first went to the gym, like holding on to that and almost like falling off because I was trying to like get the thing to read my heart rate and like Yeah. Don't
You
do that.
you were like a gym meme, goes flying across the room.
Literally. Yeah. Well, and I think so going back to like, how do you progress training? Like for a muscle building, from a muscle building standpoint, is we want to think about like progressive stimulus or progressive overload.
Yep.
So your markers of progress are going to look like, are you able to add load to the bar, or add weight to whatever exercise that you're doing week to week? Are you able to do another rep at the same weight? Are you able to better overload the target muscle in some way? So that could mean like better form, better tempo,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera. It's not just about like training, harder or doing like more, because if you just do more lateral raises, but it looks like you're, a pterodactyl and flying the weight around, like that doesn't mean that it was better, right? Or that you were working harder, right? So like working until you're tired is not the same as like working a muscle until it's like fatigued.
Well, and people often look at soreness or fatigue as measures as well. And again, for reasons of there's other variables that need to be in place to help manage your recovery. So you have to have adequate load and volume for your training in order to recover for the next time. So I always use the analogy, like you're trying to remodel the house, not burn it down and rebuild it. You don't have time to rebuild it from the time that you're training, one session to the next. And what you want to do is create a little bit of damage that can recover from one time to the next. And so again, this is why we're trying to make variables consistent, because if your variables are inconsistent, how are you supposed to measure, what's helping, what's hurting, and how you're progressing? It makes me think about too, like some people think, well, one, if they're working out and they're always sore, like that's a lot of people will quit training just because they're like, it hurts all the time. My exercise hurts all the time. And I don't know. I mean, I have workouts where I'm not even really super sore, from one day to the next. And it doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad workout or I didn't push hard enough. I know John Jewett talks about all the time, it's really hard for him to get his back even to feel sore after a pull day. I think people feel it a lot more in their legs a lot of times. But again, it's just, it doesn't mean it was a bad workout. And if you are growing, if you're progressing, and if you're getting stronger, then obviously the soreness doesn't really matter. But if it's always there, it definitely can impede your workout because, it's going to be painful. So you're not going to perform as well.
Yeah. I think one of the best tools that you can have is not your Apple Watch, but a logbook. So like and it doesn't have to be pen and paper, if you want to use an app or the notes in your phone, but having some way that you're tracking your progress in the gym and tracking your strength progressions, I feel like is a great way to make sure you're staying on track. And then to look back and be like, oh, I am getting stronger. Like this is working, especially if you're a beginner, intermediate, which most of us listening here are. Like not a lot of us are like an advanced trainee. Like I consider myself to be, an intermediate based off my training age. So, with that, like if you're a beginner or an intermediate, you should be getting stronger, maybe not every week, but every couple of weeks, those numbers should be going up, or you should be able to do another rep or two at any given weight. So like tracking that is like what you really kind of want to look for as far as, am I improving here?
Yeah. So, back in the day, there was a guy named Joe Weider, and he had this principle about muscle confusion. And this has been a myth that has not died well because there are still people who think that they need to go into the gym and do different workouts because you have to like confuse the muscle to incorporate, and a principle of that with your progressive overload. And Sarah and I were talking about this a little bit, but what you would do is if you have maxed out on an exercise that, you're not progressing anymore with, or you want to swap something out, then, that might be the time to try a different exercise in after, a period of time that you've worked with it. Or maybe like, I don't know, maybe back squats just aren't quite working for you with your back and you have maxed out on that. And now you need to move into a Smith squat instead. So you don't need to confuse the muscle, but when you have maxed out your capacity with a particular exercise, then, or even it's just, boredom could be a reason as well, not from week to week, but from, over a 6 or 8 week period or something like that is when you might exchange one exercise for another exercise.
Yeah, I really encourage people to keep like their main compound movements the same as long as they're working for you and you're getting stronger or able to continue to progress safely.
Yep.
Keep them the same for, a good like 3-4 months and then maybe mix it up. But, and that's because like if you're bouncing from a back squat to a leg press to a hack squat as your squat pattern every single week, how do you know if you improved, right? Because you're changing it up so often. Whereas if you stuck with the back squat for 3 months, you're going to be able to progress that.
Yep.
And then like we were kind of talking about like off air, like then you can change up your accessories maybe more often, so like maybe you do a dumbbell lateral raise and then the next week you do a cable lateral raise if you're someone that kind of gets bored or, kind of wants to mix it up. Or, maybe the cable area is always swamped. So you need to kind of sometimes swap it out for a dumbbell lateral. Like that's totally okay. And not having the goal of confusing your muscles, but just, kind of changing it up like that is okay.
Yeah, and especially something like a lateral raise, like there's just a million ways to do that. You can do them bench supported or leaning or whatever. And, this is where maybe on social media, you might see something that looks interesting and you could say, I want to give this a try, or I tried it and I liked it. And you can, send the video to your coach and they'll be like, this would be a good place for you to, work that in or swap that with something else. So, I get it. We're all human, right? And sometimes our workouts do get boring and you want to switch things up, but you want to keep in line with what you're like, minimizing variables as much as possible, like we had said before. Sarah, I have a question for you. Do you think that beginners have, like, I know you said that you're you would label yourself more intermediate. But do you feel like your workouts have changed a lot from the beginning of when you kind of knew what you were doing? And because I think about how I feel like I did more sets and more, maybe not more reps. I did more sets and maybe more exercises. And I think sometimes, well, I'm just curious I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was thinking as far as like how has my training changed like since I started training correctly. Like before I would do like 3 or 4 working sets for an exercise,
Mhm.
but now I really only need 1 or 2 for a lot of my working sets, or for a lot of my exercises as far as working sets, because I'm better able to recruit the target muscle. So I don't need 3 sets, 4 sets to get this mechanical tension, get that stimulation that I need. I can really do it in 1 or 2 sets. Like, so a squat, for example, like I know how to set up, I know how to position myself, I know what tempo I need to like really overload my glutes and my quads. Whereas like before, it would take more to kind of get that same stimulus, right? But now that I have more time under the bar, literally, like I can better kind of recruit the muscles that I want to recruit.
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't think like sometimes I think, oh, I wish I knew now what I knew then, but knowing that wouldn't have been better for me because I think I would have gotten less out of my workouts. I think when you do more sets, you work through those movement patterns and you learn them more efficiently. And then when you become more, efficient or precise with them, then you can get stronger at them, but you have to learn those movement patterns first. So I want people to know that, if they're starting out and they have 3 or 4 working sets, I might do less exercises just so you can really work on honing particular exercises, since you're going to be doing more sets of them, but you want to learn that first before you you have 4 to 6 exercises that only have 2 working sets or something like that. So
Yeah.
there's a time and a place for everything.
Yeah. And it's also about like how close to failure are you training, right? Like before, like maybe I thought I was training really close to failure, but I really had like 4 more reps left in the tank. Whereas like now I train like to failure for pretty much all of my working sets.
Yeah.
So I can't do as many sets if I'm going to do that. And over time, again, like as I've aged as a trainee, and as I've trained with more people and pushed myself to new levels, new limits, like I've been able to kind of push my intensity more, and like I'm able to train closer to failure. So with that, I don't need as much volume.
Yeah.
So that's also something to kind of consider. And you don't have to train to failure, right? So like if you're someone that you prefer to train, or because of previous injuries, it's smarter for you to train maybe 2 reps away from failure, maybe you do a little bit more volume.
Yeah. And I've noticed this, I mean, even with clients in the past, and this was something that I talked about too, because if you're newer and you're doing 3 or 4 work sets, and I would see their logbook and they would have, 10 on their first and 10 on their second and 10 on their third, it's like, okay, they should get progressively less if you are actually pushing yourself, because you're just going to have less energy for subsequent sets. So like you said, you might not be training as close to failure or even your reps and reserve target if all 3 or 4 of your sets, if you're doing 4 sets of 15 or 4 sets of 20, like you're not getting close to, because they just wouldn't be consistent, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What else were we going for here?
Maybe like we could talk about like some ways, like measurements besides like,
oh yeah.
like besides the scale, like how do we know that we're, improving in like whatever phase that we're in?
Yes. So,
well, I mentioned the logbook because I do feel like that's important, like looking at that.
yeah, so you can see that you're getting stronger in rep ranges above 5 and below, let's say 20 for the most part, should result in lean tissue, like adding lean tissue. That's definitely a good one. I want to mention how important progress pictures are, and maybe the proper way to set that up. So I have my clients check in usually on Friday and Saturdays, and you want to wake up in the morning, you go to the bathroom. If you have a good elimination, that's a plus, but it's not necessarily always what happens. So you go pee and then put on consistently whatever it is that you are taking your progress pictures in. You want to have good lighting. I actually usually do it right in front of this window, because natural
in front of that window.
yeah, natural light coming in. Yeah, and then at the same time and same time and what am I trying to say?
Same day.
Yeah, yeah. Like weekly is usually, I mean, weekly is what I do and what I have my clients do. So yeah.
Yeah. I would say like weekly or bi-weekly. I mean, that's what I have most clients do, is every week or every other.
Yep.
And the big thing is like that lighting, trying to keep it as consistent as possible. So like we were just saying with like the window and the natural light. So you want to have it so it's like the window, then your camera, and then you. So like the phone is in front of the window. Is that how you would say that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then you're facing that natural lighting.
Yeah. I have like I guess you would call it like a coffee table book, like a hardcover book that I lean up against the window, and then I lean my phone up against that as well. And so yeah, the light's coming from behind. I set my phone to video, and then I just step back as far as what looks like I can get. You want full body and a little bit of area around your body. And then you step back, and then I just do like my quarter turns usually, and then I just do like a relaxed front and back pose. And then you can take screenshots from them, and they're like, it should be perfect. So
That's what I do too. And that's what I tell my clients to do. It's just a little easier than having to rely on like the timer.
yes.
So yeah, just like pause for a second in your poses, whether that's competition poses or like just a regular front back side,
Yep.
and just be consistent with that.
Yep, absolutely. And then like, yeah, background should be consistently the same. What you wear for the most part, I like that to be. I don't always get that with people, but I would prefer it just because, like I said, we're always trying to minimize the variation in your variables. So
Yeah.
yeah. And then a weight. And then always like when I have clients check in, I always have them tell me like if anything has changed the night before, because sometimes I can see like water retention, or like they might be, I mean, you could be constipated or whatever's going on, and then they'll be like, oh well, I ended up taking my cheat meal last night instead of this night, or I had to do some swaps or whatever it is. So I like check-ins to happen before there's going to be like when it's been a few days of consistency. So, and then like training too, you could have like somebody do a leg day the night before, and then they're going to have some inflammation in their legs the next day or something like that. So it's important to know all those things. And when you have a good coach client communication, there's usually availability to answer like if anything was inconsistent or whatnot. So and it's just good to know. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just when I look at a photo, I want to be able to know why I see changes.
Right. Yeah, totally. I also like doing measurements, like circumference measurements, like for myself and for most of my clients, like not everyone, or I may not have everybody that does the same measurements, but doing like a waist or like around your belly button circumference measure, and then like any body parts that maybe you're trying to grow, and using those measurements like along with the progress pictures, because sometimes like the measurements stay the same but you look better. So like that's how you really know that you're building muscle too, is like if you're getting denser, right? But so like maybe your measurements are staying the same, but like when you look at a picture, you're like, you look leaner, you look harder, and that's a good way to kind of really know that you're building muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And I've always measured my legs too. And when, I have different things happening in my life, knee injury, whatnot, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I have lost almost an inch on this. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'll be like, oh, my legs look smaller. I don't always do the measurements, but I've done them enough over the years that I know, when, greater amounts of like muscle loss has happened. And I'm always like, I want to have my 24-inch thighs. Like I want to keep those.
Yeah.
So yes. Yeah. So that's definitely a good one.
And this one's kind of weird, but I encourage my clients to do it. How are you looking in like the gym or like gym lighting? And like, no, I'm not saying take a gym selfie necessarily, but like, I think we all kind of check ourselves out pretty much. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And the reason I say to do that is because a lot of clients get like frustrated with their progress pictures. And I'm like, listen, like you just woke up, right? You're fasted. You haven't had any water. There's no blood pumping, through your muscles. So you probably don't look maybe as like quote good as you do in the gym with a pump, with some food and water in you. And I think it's important to kind of notice like, oh, damn, like I didn't have that bicep vein, 6 months ago, or like I wasn't able to flex and like have that shoulder pump, or my glutes look fuller, whatever. Like I think it's important to kind of just recognize that stuff too, not be obsessive over it or like scrutinizing how you look in the mirror, but just noticing, I think is important.
Yeah. And I love that because like you do look better after you've trained, and a lot of us are in like I personally am at a level of body fat where, like if I was a little bit leaner, I would look obviously more muscular all the time. But it is what it is. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, I don't look as muscular as I want to. And then I will go train and I'm like, oh, it's all there. It's fine.
Yeah,
So I think
totally.
that's, and if you have great lighting, like that could be absolutely the confidence boost that you needed to be like, and those are, even though they're not your progress pictures, I see this a lot. And I used to do this a lot too. Like if you've got a consistent, like you've done an upper body workout, you got a good pump, you've taken a picture, maybe a couple of months later, you've done that again. And you're like, oh, like it's even more etched than what it was, or I look fuller. So you can measure progress that way as well. As long as the pictures are consistent, you can see changes in your physique. So yeah, I agree.
And one more one that like I know a lot of other people hate on too is other people like commenting like at the gym, like because I know like we shouldn't comment about other people's bodies, like whatever. But honestly, like if you train like at like a harder core gym or like a more bodybuilding kind of gym and you see the same people all the freaking time and someone says like, hey, you're looking good, or hey, like see you working hard, or you put on some muscle, like that means something. Like that's something to kind of take into account too.
Think that's funny. I had the other day while I was working, I just was going through one of the buildings and some lady stopped to me. And again, like things have been so busy here with Anna going off to college and stuff. I told you this before, like I was excited to get more consistent with like my workouts because it's been very haphazard, so I'm like having one of those days where I kind of feel like deflated and like I don't look that muscular. And she was just like, wow, like you look so good. And she had like a really pretty thick Spanish accent. And she was like, she talked to me for a little bit about like what I did. Of course, she asked some questions and stuff. And then she was like, well, I just really admire your body. I was like,
Oh, that's awesome though.
it was
And
so
like, I don't think
true.
there's anything wrong with that. Like I know we like people hate on that, like, oh, you shouldn't comment about people's bodies, but it's like we're at the gym. Like most of us are here to improve our bodies as well as like, yes, we're all there for the strength and the confidence gains and our health, but like
Yeah.
there's a little bit of vanity in it too.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because honestly, like, we were talking about all these different measurements. If you don't have a measure that's like, a lot of these are visual, even though, the goal is to be consistent and healthy and all that stuff. A lot of them are visual goals. And so when other people see that, I mean, it is a good thing. And yeah, I mean, to be the converse, like, to say like, oh, you lost weight or you look sick, or there's different ways of phrasing it so that it's not invasive. But I mean, if it's a compliment, you know how to compliment somebody, right? Like, you look good or whatever. I hope everything is going okay, or you getting to
Yeah.
the gym
I like
consistently.
it. Like I see you working hard. Like that's like I think a good way to kind of say it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I do love that too. You're right. And we kind of, I think, shied away from it once, like for the last few years, like making eye contact and talking to people. And I know I think like, oh, is it creepy if I say something to somebody like, oh my
I
gosh,
know.
your butt looks great.
I know. I feel like a girl to girl, it's not creepy. Like even
Yeah.
like I know everyone is different as far as like how they feel about this, but like if a guy says something to me and it's like you can tell the difference between someone being creepy and someone like genuinely being like, hey, like I see you every freaking Tuesday here. You're like, and every, couple of months they say something to me. Like, I don't think they're being creepy, right? Like I'm gonna take that as like, okay, I'm making some improvements here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, but I love it when women, and I try to be that person as well, just because I like the gym to be a friendly environment for women. Cause I mean, I don't know about how things are at your gym, but at my gym, it's still probably 75% men wherever I go. So
Depending on the time of day, like there are some days where I'm like, oh wow, I'm the only girl here, like in this area at least, of the gym.
yeah, yeah. So I like to be like, hey, I see you. I got you. If we
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, I was thinking kind of about SMART goals when we were talking about goals, but that's definitely something to look up as well, just to kind of pinpoint the acronym for SMART goals, right?
Specific, measurable,
Attainable,
realistic, and
timely.
timely, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
Got it done. And there's something called like smarter goals, and it's like where you I'm gonna Google it really quick because I forget what the R is. Oh, evaluate and like reevaluate are like, so if you want to make your goal like smarter, so like you have that goal and then you also add like time to like reflect, like we're talking about with different measurements of like how is it going? Like, are we improving? Like, are we progressing? Because if not, like then that's where we do want to make maybe some adjustments. So like we were saying before, like don't change your training up because you want to be consistent for maybe 8 weeks. And then if it's not working, like maybe back squats aren't a good movement for you. Like maybe we need to change to a hack squat or a leg press, or, maybe like you're just, you're kind of capped out at your walking lunges as far as like how much weight you can add to them. Maybe we go to a Smith machine lunge, something like that. Like those are like good. It is important to reevaluate and kind of reassess and make adjustments as needed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's life, right? Because everything is seasons and phases. And I think this is one of the biggest things that cause people to quit is just they can't manage the variables that are changing and they don't know how to adjust their plan to what life is throwing at them, so there's going to be big things that happen. And I want to encourage people that you can always do it. You can always sit down and make adjustments and keep going. Because a lot of people do, they just give up. I don't have time for this. I don't do it. If that means, now you can only go to the gym 1 or 2 times a week, it's still going to help you maintain that muscle that you've been building, rather than if you just decide to throw in the towel and not go at all. So, and one of the other, I think people call them sometimes like non-scale victory type stuff. One of the other things that I think about too, as far as measures of progress, is just how you handle situations that normally would throw you off, which kind of ties into what I was just saying. And a lot of these are food related. I have, people that think that they can't, they've labeled foods good and bad and they can't do that. So dieting to them meant being 100% clean and perfect, and they can't, deviate from this. And, especially for a healthy lifestyle, there's a lot of room to groove with moderation and learning how to do that. And I think that only comes through practice. And that's why, like, I don't shy away from people having these experiences, like going to events that normally would maybe trigger them or cause a lot of anxiety, and just say, you know what, you're going to handle it. You're going to make a decision, and then you're going to evaluate how you responded and accept what you did, without guilt or shame. You get to decide. It's your life. And then, you decide, did it progress me towards my goals? Was it worth it? You do all the things and you practice it the next time. So someone who's looking for the perfect stretch of time to be on plan 100%, that's not how life works, and it won't happen. And you have to know how to manage those, those obstacles when they come your way. And so those are some of my favorite things when, clients are like, oh, I had 2 slices of pizza and I did my check-in and I still was down half a pound. I'm like, yeah, it's not, you can make things work for you off plan. It's not the devil. You
I
don't
like
have
that. No, I like that you're bringing this up because I mean, it's something I think as coaches, we like to point out for our clients that you're having like these wins or like these experiences that used to really rattle you, or like you're able to have an untracked day and still be on track, right? Or go on vacation and your digestion doesn't totally fall apart, for example. But I really like when clients are able to notice it for themselves. Like, hey, like, before, like, if my kid got sick or if my car broke down, like I used to like go home and like, eat, a bag of chips and I don't even freaking know what you were, right? Like, but now I was able to kind of like slow down, like see what I had in the kitchen, make a meal, or, you know, hey, I swung by Chick-fil-A, but I was able to get the grilled nuggets and, you know, kind of side salad thing and make it work still. And I think that like noticing that you're able to kind of approach situations that used to rattle you with grace, with, you know, kind of doing that next right thing, that's a huge win too.
Yeah, there's just, I think a lot of us grew up thinking fitness is so black and white. And if you are, let's say, an Olympian, there's probably a lot less balance that's happening, right? But for a lot of us who are just trying to live and be healthy and be able to, I always say, fit bodybuilding into my life rather than make bodybuilding be my life. There's a lot of gray area there. And you know, you can, and it comes from experimenting. Oh, you know, that wasn't worth it. It didn't work out well for me or whatever. Versus like, oh, you know what? I was able to do that. That means I can do that again sometime. That's what worked out for me. And I think that's how you manage life rather than trying to manage all the variables. You manage your response and your reaction to all them.
Totally. And
Yeah.
don't be afraid to experiment. It really is all trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. All right, Sarah, I think this was a good one. I think we covered a lot of it. Was there anything else that you were thinking of?
No, I think that was a lot of what we wanted to cover as far as progressing your training, you know, and, you know, measures of progress, how to assess like if a program is working, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, very cool. All right. Well, you guys, if you want to follow Sarah, you can find her on Instagram. I always want to say your website.
I do have a website too, but yeah, most of my stuff is on my Instagram. If you go to my link tree there, at Sarah Ford Bishop, or my website is sarahbishopfitness.com if you want to check that out too.
Very cool. All right, you guys, you can follow me on Instagram. I might start posting fitness stuff again. I was like so caught up in parenting, my account kind of changed, but I'll probably switch back to posting more about my goals and clients and that type of stuff. But you can follow the podcast too at the Women's Fittest, and you know, look for us monthly doing myth busting. It's been super fun, Sarah. I appreciate you. Thanks.
I appreciate you having me on, and we'll have more myths next month.
Yes. Sounds really, really good. All right. Remember that healthy looks different on everybody. Have the best day.